got a special guest, very special guest. One of the big homies from Vegas, Philly, founder of the Source magazine, instrumental in a lot of these hip hop DJs and amazing club DJs in Las Vegas. We got my man, on top of a bunch of other things that he did. We got my man Shecky Green in the building, Mr. John Shecter.
Yes.
What's up, people?
Hey.
Pleasure to be here.
It's a big pleasure for you to be here, man.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, man.
No, seriously, my pleasure.
So we got our youngest member here, Jamie the Great, who, you know, to be honest, heard about you but didn't really know much about you. You know what I mean?
Not at all. I seen you before, but I didn't know who you were.
Yeah. So we had to kind of explain to him about, you know, you founding the Source and everything. But I also want to talk about, you know, Philly, because I guess, you know, Philly's kind of popping right now.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Good timing to talk about Philly.
They just won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, Super Bowl. You know what I'm saying? The Eagles is in there. You know, Meek Mill. Like the Eagles even ran out to Meek Mill, Dreams and Nightmares.
Yeah.
That was dope.
Yeah.
That was dope.
So I guess why don't we take it back to Philly, man? Because honestly, a lot of your roots back there in Philly also had to do with some of the DJs and the music you came up with.
Oh, for sure.
And even till you know, when you moved to Vegas, you brought a lot of those peoples with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I was lucky to be born at a time and at an age where hip hop, before there was hip hop. So when Rapper's Delight came out, 1979, 1980, I remember hearing that piece of vinyl for the first time. It was actually on a Fisher-Price turntable in school. A kid came in, Alexis Dean, came in with a piece of vinyl, I remember, and he put it on, and it was a little Fisher-Price turntable. Ever seen those?
Yeah.
Like plastic?
Used to have one, actually.
Yeah, and I was like, what is... I recognized the beat because I was already into disco, actually, and I recognized the Good Times, you know, chic drum, you know, bass line. And,
How old were you?
I would have been like 11 or 12 years old, and from that point, I just was hooked. You know, I remember later that day or later that week, I went into a record store and I said, "Do you have that record where he talks about a bottle of KO Pectate?" And the guy was like, "What are you talking about?" No, I was like, he's kind of talking over Good Times, and he's like, "Oh, that's you know, Rapper's Delight." And he gave it to me, and from that point, I was basically hooked on hip hop. Lucky to be in Philly when, which was kind of like the sixth borough or the fifth borough, whatever the next borough after Brooklyn and
After
Bronx.
New York, yeah.
Because we were the first place that hip hop came after New York, and because of that, we were a place that had a lot of avid consumers of hip hop and a lot of DJs. And it was the first place that rappers would visit when they went on tour, where they were treated like a star. You know, so just being in that environment in the 80s, of course, it didn't start right away. It was a slow build. 1980, you know, 1981, we had the Planet Rock and Africa Bambaataa and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, with the Run DMC era is kind of when rappers as stars and rappers as personalities became more prominent.
When did like the club scene, like when did hip hop emerge into the club scene in Philly, and then like what DJs were kind of on the come up of that scene, and what maybe the first DJs actually spinning hip hop? You know what I mean?
Well, the most famous, of course, are Jazzy Jeff and Cash Money. There were other DJs before them, but those are the most important, I think, to name if we're going to give a broad overview, because, you know, both in different ways and kind of in different neighborhoods, much like New York, you know, there were crews and MCs are built around the DJ culture and DJs themselves. And, you know, for me, my, you know, passion for hip hop just kind of evolved naturally to the point where I wanted to work at where it was coming from, which for us was Power 99 FM. So that station was kind of the centerpiece of hip hop in Philadelphia. And Lady B, who was kind of the female radio host of a hip hop show called Street Beat, had different DJs in and out. So she wasn't the one spinning the record. She was more like the host. Yeah. And so that show was incredibly influential for anyone in Philly who loved hip hop between the early to mid 80s,
So, like-
into the late 80s.
So Lady B was like your high school era, right? Kind
Yeah,
of.
pretty much. Yeah, Lady B. So, but for me, I wanted to go beyond. So I actually one day just drove up to the station and like was so into hip hop. I was like, I need to work. I need to like get involved. And I ended up becoming an intern when I was in like 11th grade. So yeah, like my high school years.
Wow.
This was during the era of like UTFO and stuff like that,
Yeah.
So that was kind of my introduction, and I became friends with UTFO. I met all those people,
wow.
And that was when the Philly hip hop scene started to take shape. Because prior to that, it was very small,
Right.
as far as just being really fans. Then after, sort of like you got into like 85, 86, with the emergence of Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince, along with 3 Times Dope a little later and stuff like that. That's when it became more about artists and DJs, who in particular.
Now, how big was Fresh Prince and Jazzy Jeff when they came out? Like
Yo,
for Philly.
They was big.
Now I know. See,
know
like
what
I remember Fresh Prince and Jazzy Jeff. Parents just don't understand.
Before that, with
Even
girls,
before that.
girls with
No.
nothing but
Yeah,
trouble.
Girls ain't
Correct.
nothing but trouble.
Correct.
Yeah.
See, Girls of the World Ain't Nothing But Trouble came out, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in 86.
Yeah, around there.
And when that record came, this is what people don't understand. First of all, that record, if you don't know, samples I Dream of Jeannie.
Yeah.
So it's like a very catchy, very poppy, and almost, happy sounding
The video
sample.
was like perfect for MTV.
No,
It
there was no video for
Nah,
Girls of
no?
the World.
that came out. Nah, they didn't have a video.
Oh, I'm thinking
That's
about
all.
parents just don't
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
true. That was their follow-up,
Yeah.
right? But Girls of the World, if you listen to it now, it sounds like a very happy, kind of like, fun record, right? And he tells a funny story.
Yeah.
And Fresh Prince has all his personality and all that on the record.
He's an amazing storyteller.
And
Yeah.
Like as with his rapping, right?
Yeah.
That was his main thing. Like basically a Philly version of like Slick Rick, but like a little
Yeah.
bit more fun and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
But that was the style back in '86 because you had UTF. Who's only bugging?
Whistle.
Whistle that
Yeah.
had they sample Andy Griffin.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of TV show. That
Exactly,
was the theme.
that
It
was the big
Bad
thing back
Boys.
then.
The Bad Boys.
Inspector
Gadget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of records that were built. So that was kind of the trend at that moment.
Yeah.
And so the song came out and it was very popular in Philly. And the funny thing is, though, this is what people don't really know about Fresh Prince, is that when he came out with that kind of style, it was actually big in the real hip hop scene in Philly. I mean, you listen to it now, that became the crossover sort of breakthrough record.
Mm-hmm.
Parents Just Don't Understand became the record that the first basically one of the first mainstream rap records that everyone could relate to.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a very safe message that white, black, Asian, whatever, everyone could relate to.
It was like borderline Young MC kind of like busted like a little bit because it crossed over
A
to
little
that
bit.
MTV like
Yeah.
that MTV kid
Yeah.
that was watching. You know what I mean?
But the point I'm trying to make is that was real hip hop back then.
Yeah.
And like that, when those records came out, they weren't poppy, cheesy, because there was no such thing.
Yeah.
We didn't even know pop rap had not been invented yet. There wasn't even the idea that a rapper could be pop. It was just, this is all hip hop and it's all great and we love it. And whether you're in the hood or whether you're in like, whatever circle you're in, you would find people loving that record, and anyway.
But you know what? My first taste of Philly rap, Schooly D,
Oh yeah.
PSK,
Oh,
Gucci
man.
Time.
The
That
best.
was man.
That shit is legendary. That's like maybe the first gangster rap song, right?
Yeah.
Kind of? Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, people consider that the first gangster hip hop record. And the great thing about it, I mean, that record is great for so many reasons, mostly the way it sounds. It's so big. It sounds like it's just like destroying the room.
Yeah.
Those
you know?
drums, man.
And the great thing is that he's playing it live. It's not
Oh.
even sampled. He basically took like a loop, and that's why I said 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and it's all like basically manual. Like he's not even looping it. He just basically
That's why,
playing
like
it.
in the last bar, like there's no drums and it just comes
Yeah,
back on. And
exactly.
He's hitting it again.
It's a little off. Yeah, it's a little bit off, but it makes it work somehow because it's so. And also the way that record is mixed and the way it sounds is so unique. And later on, when it got sampled by Foxy Brown and Case or whatever, like all these other people.
Well, Biggie redid it, right?
And
In his
Biggie
own-
redid-
Yeah.
Yeah, on Life After Death, he did it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the words got redone, but even the song, when the music part gets sampled, you always can recognize it right away because it has that very distinctive kind of like flavor to it, and
Yeah.
it's not. There aren't something about the mix session that day. Whatever he did that day in the studio is
His
legendary.
cadence too, man. Like he just sound like he don't give a fuck. Like he's a little offbeat on certain joints, man. It's kind of dope. But
Yeah.
Is that the guy that I think Eazy-E gave a lot of credit to him, like about his style with gangster rap? I
Probably.
remember.
Could have
Yeah.
been, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's elements of it in Boys in the Hood, a little bit. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those heavy drums and shit, the way it
Yeah.
hits. It's kind of like a more modern version of that shit. But
Yeah.
Schooly, yeah, he was a big influence on all those early gangster rappers, and he went on to become a film score, a film composer. He did the King of New York
Yeah.
and a few other movies.
I didn't. Yeah, I remember that Schooly D song or him rhyming in that
Saturday
one
night.
scene. Yeah, that shit
Yeah.
was crazy.
Yeah,
I remember watching. I was like, God damn, this is so ill.
Yeah.
That was when did NWA come out after that?
89.
89.
88.
88. Yeah.
88, yeah. 88 was NWA's year. 88 was also, by the way, the best year in the history of hip-hop. For those who don't know, I think
I
Neville
agree,
probably
I agree
agree
with you on that, man.
88.
I appreciate it. Thank you,
Yeah.
Neville. Thank you for that. 1988, I think for people our age group who are like who've been around from the beginning of hip hop, that's the year when everything kind of came together. It was just like, I mean, Boogie Down Productions, Eric B. and Rakim, Slick Rick, NWA, Public Enemy, Big Daddy Kane, EPMD,
Biz Markie.
Biz Markie. I mean, the list goes on
Legends.
and on.
Shit.
Yeah.
Damn.
All those artists came
That's a
out
lot.
with like debut albums or their biggest albums, and it was Public Enemy, Rakim, and Boogie Down Productions were the leaders at that time.
Yeah.
Back in Philly, when you were growing up in your teen years, was there like teen clubs you would go just to go listen to some hip hop music? Or you would go to Jazzy Jeff's house parties?
Well, Jazzy Jeff was known for playing high schools. That's how they got started. So the earliest tapes, the first time I ever heard Jazzy Jeff scratch was a cassette tape from a high school performance from Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince. And he's doing the thing where he makes it sound like a whistle, like, go real fast. And a lot of the stuff that later, some of the routines they put on record also.
Well, was that the first time he did the Transforming?
That era, yeah, that time frame, yeah, that was he
invented Transforming.
basically.
pretty much.
Yeah, he was the first one to do. He made it sound like in a way you never had heard before. Yeah,
Right.
he basically broke so much new ground. And then to answer your question, there were the teens hung out in different places where we could, like high schools or so
Roller rinks?
there was this thing called Rubber Park, which was downtown where I lived, like in Center City, Philly, but like downtown part, and it was kind of like a mixed, kind of gathering of hip hop people, and it got a little rough around the edges sometimes, but it was what you'd expect. I mean, basically people breakdancing, graffiti, I mean all the things that hip hop was known for. That was where I would go to experience it.
So we're hearing about high school, we're hearing about the radio, right?
Yeah.
11th grade, you started getting into the radio.
Yeah.
And then how did we move into college with the Source? I'm assuming the Source started around college, right?
Yeah. Well, I was a good student. I got lucky. I got to Harvard.
Yeah,
I went to Harvard. I got into Harvard.
I have another
Yeah.
another side note. I have another question about your college years, but we'll go into that after we hear about the Source. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. So, long story short, once I got to college, I wanted to do hip hop radio because that was my high school senior year. I was just basically all in on Power 99, and I wanted to do that. So I found the radio station, WHRB, which is the Harvard radio station, which was a classical music format, except for on the weekends. On the weekends, they would have all these other shows.
Right.
So I found like the one little group of people that were doing R&B at that time. It wasn't really hip hop, and connected with them. And over the course of like the first year, because it takes a while to kind of get into the system, you have to basically pay your dues, and
Right.
like normal type of thing. And
What were they playing? Just an example, just an idea of what we were.
Bobby Brown?
no, like I don't know, like Alexander O'Neal and stuff
I was
like
thinking
that.
that, yeah. Like that
Surface,
era. Yeah.
Surface, Happy, and
Yeah.
I mean, it was a college station, so it was relatively small audience, at least, well, before we started. But
Right.
so basically, what happened was eventually, that evolved into a rap radio show called Street Beat, which basically I stole the name from Lady B.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
What happened was, okay, so to give you the details, so I should introduce that I met my partner in the Source, Dave Mays, around the same time. He was pursuing a job working in the newspaper of Harvard when I was pursuing this working in the radio station. And I said to him, hey, man, like at the radio station, he was selling ads and trying to basically get it because he had a knack for selling ads, it turned out. Okay, so he was selling ads for the Harvard newspaper, but I said, hey, if you do this for the radio station, they let you make money. The newspaper didn't let you keep the money. You had to give it all to the newspaper. But with the radio, you got your little 10% or 15, whatever it was, you know? And he's like, what? And so then he came over to there, and that essentially was the beginning of the Source. So we started this rap radio show called Street Beat. I went back to Philly and stole all of Lady B's audio drops from her Power 99. So these very professional sounding, like, you're listening to Street Beat, you know, like those kind of things, and stole all that, brought it back up there to give us a little edge on the competition, because there was a few other radio shows in the Boston area at that time. All of us around the same time. Now we're talking about the prime time, 87, 88. This was now hip-hop's prime time. And so there were 3 or 4 different shows. We were one of them. And eventually Dave and myself built up that show into a very popular show, and we would get a lot of calls, and that's the birth of the Source. The Source came out of the desire for us to promote our hip-hop radio show.
So you created like a pamphlet? Or
creating like a sort of like a one page and then a few pages, and it was all designed to, hey, check out our show, showing the industry that we exist so we could get records and we could get interviews and we could get all the things you want for a radio show.
So it's like a newsletter.
Yeah. And it was like, at first we changed our identity a few times, and first it was like Boston's first and only hip-hop newsletter. And then it was the voice of the rap music industry. And then it was hip-hop, music, culture, and politics. Like it basically evolved from a more industry thing for us to just get on the map. And then later we started realizing that there was nobody in the journalism world addressing hip-hop music the way it should be addressed. There was the Village Voice, which was the best one. There was Rolling Stone was just almost 0% hip hop, and Spin maybe like 5% hip hop. You know, so there weren't many. And then they had
you had like Word Up,
right?
Rap Masters,
yes, Salt and Pepper and Heavy D up in the limousine, and you know, so all that you had all those basically very straightforward like picture books, you call them, like Rap Masters, Word Up,
Right On,
Black Beat was another one, and basically it was pictures of artists, you know, not even good pictures actually, like just like mediocre pictures of artists, full page bleed,
like pinup. It was like literally pinups, right?
Yeah,
just about
basically, and I like that in a lot of those throwback movies that you see now. You see like they have them on the wall, like they it's a detail that they put whenever they, like, I just watched that Tupac movie the other day, and I saw that they had like the Right On posters on the wall and stuff.
So wait, when you were going through this like evolution, what was that time span of like all the names changing? Like 6 months, a year, 2 years?
I just encapsulated like 3 years into like one sentence. That was like a long evolution. That was a three or 4 year evolution. What I described, going from one thing to another, and then realizing that what we really should be is a hip hop consumer magazine for fans.
So I want to talk about that. So you first started out handing out basically almost flyers for your radio show.
Basically, yeah.
How long did it take for you to be like, we want to write more? Like, what was on the first flyer? Like, where did it become articles and all of this stuff?
You know, at first it was us wanting to put charts, and we did a few the first interview was KRS-One, and KRS was a key figure for me personally and for the Source in general. And there was, but other than that, it was really small write-ups about different cities, about different records. It evolved. Initially, it was really just about promoting ourselves. I mean, you know, as we got deeper into it, we started covering more territory. That's kind of how it evolved.
Did you put like more information on there to explain what the show was about? Like, what was the?
Well, I mean, initially it was promoting our show, but then as we started getting a wider and wider audience, we started, by like the 5th or 6th issue, we had kind of pivoted to a broader focus, not just about us anymore. It was about
the music,
the music, and just becoming like an authority on the music by just writing about it. I mean, a lot of these records, no one was writing about, like literally no one.
And you were pulling these newsletters out like every week, every month.
Like, well, not monthly in the end, but up to that, maybe every 6 weeks to 2 months. Yeah, every couple months we get one out, and we would literally. We'd have all our names and addresses. So one thing that we do is we take names and addresses from the radio show. So we build up a mailing list. Then we also would mail to all the record stores, all the record companies, all the other DJs, anyone in the industry. And if you remember back then, the only way you know who's in the industry is how. How would you know? Never.
The back of the album cover.
100% correct.
That had the address of the record label.
The only way we would know anything about who's in the industry back then, pre-internet, pre-everything, is the record, the 12-inch or LP vinyl back of the record, where you would see not just the name and address of the label that put out that record, but the shout-outs to all the other people and all the other DJs. And that's how getting on that was almost like the first ever who's who of hip-hop, basically. Like the shout-outs on big albums and getting your name in that. Like, I don't remember when I got mine the first time, but it's a big deal. It feels like, it's like, wow, and like you've made it. Now you're on the list along with Chuck Chillout, Red Alert, Molly Mall, people like that, And so, yeah, that was kind of how we got all our information. And then we'd be kind of on our dorm room floor with like all the newsletters, sorting them by zip code, like by hand, and then putting them in rubber bands and taking them to the post office by hand. And that lasted for like a few years in that stage. Yeah.
Damn. How did you guys land on The Source, like the title, The Source?
KRS has a rhyme where he's like, "You want a fresh rhyme? You come to the source," and that's where we ended up.
Wow.
So by the 3 years that you were doing it, you created this name for the East Coast, pretty much. You would say for your newsletter.
Well, we were, you could look at it as like the college era of the Source was like about 3 years, and then that once we graduated and we moved the business to New York, that's when it really became the Source.
But even those colleges, you were still able to get a KRS to do an interview?
Yeah, well, there was a famous story where, basically I arranged for KRS. I was the key person to help KRS come to Harvard to speak in front of the Harvard School of Government. And all these like high-end people, and there was Cornel West was there, all these like heavy black intellectuals and professors and all these people. And it's long story short, he was late. Okay, so after arranging this, and I'm the only key link to him. There's like 1,000, 1,500 people in a room with all these people. There's a panel set up, and there's a little sign that says KRS, and he's not there. Okay, and everyone is like freaking out, and I'm out on the street, like waiting for him, and it's 45 minutes. It's an hour later.
This is no cell phones. This is nothing.
No
right?
cell phones. And I see off way into the distance, I see like a commotion, and my heart like lifts up in my chest, like that's got to be him. Like, and it's basically KRS, who's a big dude, being trailed like the Pied Piper with like all these kids following him. He shows up, he walks in, the crowd goes crazy, and then he like destroyed it.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of our relationship, basically.
Wow.
That's fucking dope.
That's nuts. So then after the college years,
Go
right?
to New York.
You guys head to New York. And then what was the plan? What did you guys have like offers on the table? That's a big move going to New York, nah?
Well, we knew it was 100% what we knew we had to do. It wasn't, I don't remember even discussing it much. It was just like, as soon as we're done, we have to move this operation to New York because that was the center of hip hop.
Right.
And we knew this guy, Bill Stephanie, you know who that is? He was one of the founders of Public Enemy and Hank Shockley. And we knew those two guys, and Bill Stephanie had taken an office in a building on Broadway in Houston, 594 Broadway. And that was where we decided to put our first office because we knew Bill, and it was a dope building. It was a great location.
Was that between on Prince Street? Around there? Or-
Right between Houston and Prince, yeah.
I got a funny story. I submitted a resume for the Source magazine back in '92.
Oh, man. You came to that building then, 594. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was it.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
You didn't get a call back? You didn't nothing?
Obviously, nah.
We're still waiting for the call as we speak.
Crazy.
That's
Yes.
nuts.
So then you're in New York. You got these links and connects. And then what was the next stage?
You know, that was what I call sort of our, you know, that was when I look back on the whole history, that's my favorite time because we knew what we had to do, but we never took a course on business or magazines or anything. We just knew kind of by instinct what we had to do. And we did it. I mean, it was, you know, first it was sloppy, you know, like one room with like 6 different phones and all that. And then eventually we like kind of figured it all out, but we were all young, like, you know, 21-year-old kids. But at that point we had accumulated like a crew of, you know, about 6 people or so. And, you know, that was kind of like the golden era. That's my golden era.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably like I remember picking up my first issue of The Source in like The Wiz in New York.
Oh, yeah. Nobody beats the Wiz.
Nobody beats The Wiz. And I think it was TLC on the cover.
Oh, that was it's too bad that was your first.
I know, but it was still it was amazing, yo. You know what I'm saying? Like at that time, it was amazing.
I'll tell you a funny story about that cover. That was the first one we ever did with an R&B group, okay? Because we were like we were on the fence about it, you know, but it was part of sort of a plan to try to get bigger, you know? So, okay, let's try it. So we did it, and then the cover comes back, and their skin is green. There was like a problem, like the printer messed up, and like the skin, it just looked like they were all sick, or like it looked terrible. So not only was it the first R&B cover, but they looked terrible.
That's wild.
Yeah.
We have a bet going on because I read this somewhere on the internet, so I assume it's true. Me and Never have a bet going on. Who was the first person on an issue of The Source?
Wait, but who would you say it was?
I said it was Ice-T. No?
No, that's a good answer. No. I'm trying to think about how I can answer this accurately because Ice-T was the first cover that we put on the newsstand.
There you go. That's what I
So
said.
in some ways, that is accurate. That was the first real big cover we had was Ice-T from New Jack City. Ice-T in a scene with like in the middle of like a New Jack City shot, you know?
I think I remember that shot. Was he holding a gun?
I can't remember. I can't remember. He might have been. I can't remember.
So was he the first artist?
No.
On
because-
the newsstand.
No,
that's
no.
what I said earlier.
So no, not the first. The
I'll
first.
reread my
You
statement.
didn't say newsstand, brother.
Yeah,
you
I
said
did.
the first
I
artist
said no. I
on
said
the
newsstand.
Source magazine.
I said
I don't even think
officially-
Jamie knows what a
I said
newsstand is.
the first newsstand edition of The Source
Right.
featured rap performer Tracy Laura Morrow, also known as Ice-T. I said that.
You didn't say newsstand. You said the first artist on the cover of the
Yeah.
Source magazine.
No one remember I said newsstand now?
No,
Fine.
you didn't say newsstand.
Was the movie pretty much the reason why you chose Ice-T? Was it based around that?
I think at that the decision there was about we knew this was our first big newsstand issue, so we wanted to do something that would connect with the widest audience possible. That was what you always do with a cover.
Yeah.
A cover of any magazine. I mean, you don't really have them anyway.
You want people to pick it up and be intrigued by the cover.
You're
and
trying
then,
to put the biggest lure that you got based on what's happening in the culture at that time, you know, hip hop culture, pop culture, whatever.
Was that maybe one of the first West Coast artists that you've had on the cover?
Yeah, but not the first. He never is right. Is that there actually were earlier covers? I mean, De La Soul was one of our first covers.
You had KRS-One on
KRS-One.
the early covers. Yeah.
Slick Rick was an early cover as well. We had there's one cover which was a very strange one that had Too Short and NWA together, and with like a very ugly like slanted line in between them, like trying to show like two parts of California kind of. Another thing I should mention is because we were so early, you know, in covering hip hop culture, we were the first people, along with Yo MTV Raps, that had to contend with the diversity of all these different areas that were coming up. Like New York had always dominated hip hop,
Right.
But around the Source time is when, and Yo MTV Raps was when Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, you know, other cities started to, San Francisco, all started to kind of come up with hip hop, and no one in New York wanted to hear that shit. You know, people in New York and Philly,
I
which
remember
is
that. Yeah.
very similar to New York, you know, taste wise. People in the East Coast where hip hop was born were like, nah, we don't want to hear that. And I remember with NWA, for example, I was in Boston at the time, Cambridge, and I loved NWA. I mean, NWA to this day is one of my favorite groups of all time, not just hip hop groups, you know. And I came down to Philly, my hometown, and I walked in the record store, Sounds of Market, you might remember, in Philly, which is similar to like Music Factory in New York, like one of the key places you got vinyl. And I said, yo, you got that NWA, you know? And he's like, what? That shit sucks. That shit is garbage. That shit is garbage. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yo, that no one out here is playing that shit. Nobody. And I'm like, dude, everyone where I'm coming from is, you know, meaning Boston, which was like a little pocket of like West Coast kind of feeling for some reason. And literally 1 year later, everyone in Philly's playing it. It took a whole year.
This is like what, 89, right?
Right, 88, 89.
89,
I'm talking about that time frame, 88, 89. So it took a whole year for NWA to penetrate that bubble. But when they did, you know, it was the LP straight out of Compton.
It was the same thing with New York.
Yeah.
Same shit. Yeah. Like in 88, nobody was fucking with NWA. But the next year, everybody was fucking with them.
I mean, Straight Outta Compton was like, for me, it was crazy. It was like the first time I ever heard like just curses and drug shit and like violence. Motherfuckers saying like "fuck the police." I mean, I don't know how, I was probably like 10, maybe like 10 or 11, and it was just like and you know, just like Walkmans was popping, and my mom didn't even know what I was listening to, but I'm like, you know, like I'm listening to this shit, and I'm like, yo, this is crazy, and it was man. I mean, as far as what you're talking about with like West Coast artists and all these, I remember when you guys would have like 8Ball and MGJG and all of these dudes on the covers, I'd be like, man,
it's a letdown.
Exactly. From me being in New York, I'd be like, yo, what the fuck is this? Like, who are these dudes? And I never really got their music. And there was this big DJ that used to always be in the Source magazine, I remember. I think it was DJ Magic or Magic
Mike?
Magic
Yeah.
Mike.
No, is that not the
movie.
not the movie, but is it Magic Mike or what was it? I'm trying to remember. It was a Miami dude, I think.
I thought he was from like
Maybe
Texas,
I'm wrong.
down
Yeah, I could
south.
be wrong.
But he always had like an ad or something.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was huge though. He would always have like a 2-page ad or like an ad, or his mixtape or his album would be there, and it'd be like 3-4 stars. 4 mics. I'd be like, how the fuck did this dude get like 4 mics? And I never wanted to like shell out the money to like buy his tape or his CD.
I remember when DJ Quick came around, there was another shocker because of the way he looked with his hair and all that, and people would like, you know, what the fuck is this shit? They see the ad and they'd be like, what the fuck is this? And then it took a long time for that one to catch on the East Coast too. But that's when we started to realize, the point I'm trying to make about that is that hip-hop was more diverse than just New York. And our job, even though not all of our audience liked it, such as yourself, was to try to capture the whole thing.
No, you did a great job.
You did
of
a
that.
great job, yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? That's crazy.
How did you come about with the Unsigned Hype column?
So Unsigned Hype was a creation of myself and Maddie C, who is a very important person. Maddie C, that's when Biggie says peace to Mateo, that's who he's talking about. He was one of the earliest members of the Source Mind Squad. That's what we called ourselves, Mind, M-I-N-D Squad. And Matt just had a knack. Matt went on, of course, to sign, you know, Mobb Deep, Big Pun, many other people to Loud. But at that moment, Matt was the beginning of his career, and he had a knack for just knowing talent and like he just had a real skill there. And we would get hundreds or even thousands of tapes a month, like so many.
Well, were you guys getting demos before Unsigned Hype?
I think so. I think that's why I think the reason we started is because we'd start getting demos, and we'd be like, what are we going to do with all this stuff?
And then Matt was listening to all of them?
And well, once we decided, okay, you know what, let's take it on, and then Matt himself started listening to all of them, and that was the beginning, and we did it a few times, and everyone liked it, and then it kind of the volume increased, more tapes, and as you guys know, even to this day, it's the same rule. that if you listen to demos, like 99% are
Trash.
terrible.
Trash, yeah.
So how was like hearing that first Biggie over that Big Daddy Kane record?
Okay, so yeah, that is probably the highlight of Unsigned Hype for me, and is probably for the whole thing was getting that tape. Matt knew Mr. C. Mr. C had recorded, or I guess it was either that 50 grand or it was those guys together somehow recorded the tape of Biggie, and he's rhyming over.
Ain't no half step.
Yeah, is that bull? What's the original? It's called like Blind Alley or
Blind Alley, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Blind Alley, he was playing Blind Alley back to back.
Yeah.
And Biggie comes on and he's Matt first of all says like, dude, you got to hear this shit. Like, stop everything, like right now. Pops in the tape. I hear Blind Alley, and then he's like, Biggie is very polite, and he's like, I want to say thank you to the Source for giving me a chance to perform for you guys. I really respect you. You know, he was like saying stuff like that. And then he starts rhyming, and it was, I don't remember the rhymes, but it was, Matt still has the tape, but
No.
I haven't heard it in a long time, yeah. But he basically is the Biggie that we love. You know, he was articulate and funny and sharp and all the things that you remember, and had so much style.
So did you know Big was going to be as huge as he is?
Of course not. I mean, you know, but I do remember, you know, I was lucky to be around when, thanks to Matt, and then Biggie became kind of Matt's project. He took him to Puff. He actually had a meeting with Puff.
This was before the issue went out? Or?
No, the issue came out.
I just kind of want to see, like, what I deal with. So, like, I talk to a lot of young people. I talk with, you know, people in their early 20s, you know what I mean? And they don't, you know, they're very, like, they think everything happens, like, quickly.
Yeah.
They don't know the process and the development of it. So that's why I try to ask about, like, you know, your college years in the Source. How long was that? That was 3 years, because it can sound like a month or 2 months,
right.
you know. But you know, when you get a tape from Biggie, right?
Yeah.
For that to make it to the issue, how many months was that?
Well, that one went right to the top because it was like, you know, okay, we pushed everything to the side. Like,
right.
That's this month. So I think maybe there was about a month passed before about a month or 3 to 4 weeks before we got the tape. The issue comes out. First phone call, Puffy. He had just started his new company. He had just left Andre Harrell.
And he picked up the issue. He saw that in the Source.
He saw that, and he saw, like, there's just a little picture of Biggie. You might have seen it. This guy, Chimo Du, is an amazing photographer.
I actually wanted to talk about him too because
he took that photo. Yeah, he took that photo. And so Puffy calls Matt because Matt had his name on it. Matt did the write up, so it was signed Matty C. So Puffy calls Matty C and says, I want to talk to you about this guy because I just started my new company. I'm looking for people. And Matt goes up there, has the meeting. Matt, even though there was a picture of him, I remember Matt said that Puffy said, so what does he look like? Is he like a good-looking dude? Like, what does he look like? And Matt's like, yeah, like he's, you know, he's got style. He's got style. You know, Matt's trying to, like, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, he was just trying to answer. You know, it's just these are the things that Puffy was asking, you know.
And then Puffy hasn't heard anything. He's just read that article, right?
No, so you played him the demo.
He did.
He played the demo, and then soon after, within about less than a month later, Party and Bullshit is out, and that's from
Who's the Man?
Who's the Man soundtrack,
Yeah.
right?
Damn.
And that was the moment when sort of the fuse was lit, because that record came out, and obviously immediately everyone in New York went crazy.
It was like Party and Bullshit, and then Dreams.
I think Dreams was the one that fucking blew up. That was big in New York.
True. Party and Bullshit was more underground. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, of course, the next major moment for that would be when I was sitting, I remember, on a stoop outside Washington Square Park. And Matt was also an expert at rolling joints. So he rolled like a cone, like a European style, like huge cone. And we were lighting it, and he's like, check this out. And he puts in, and I hear Mtume's Juicy Fruit, you know, which I love, the original. Yeah. And it was the first day demo of Juicy, like the next day out of the studio. And I was just like, and then when he says, smiles every time my face is up in the Source, of course, that was very memorable, because you're like, wow, But just the whole thing, the way it sounded, how it sounded just like amazing.
Did you? I mean, the movie Notorious.
They didn't put that in the movie.
Did you feel? I still felt like that should have been a part, even if it was like a minute of the movie. You know what I mean?
Well, I appreciate that, and the truth is that I know the guy that wrote that movie. This guy Cheo Coker, and he sent me the script, and there was a scene.
There was.
So they cut it out. It was on the cutting room floor. But there is a scene where I'm there and Matt is there, and then Puffy's, the early Puffy meeting and all that. Everything I described, there was actually, they filmed it. There was a guy playing me, there was a guy playing Maddie. The whole thing was filmed, and then for some reason never didn't make it into the movie.
Damn.
I wonder if
I want to know who I want to know who played you, Shaq.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
That's crazy.
So nuts.
After that, was there any other labels hitting you up for Unsigned Hype artists? Like, who was the next one that you can?
The most famous Unsigned Hype people would be Common.
Yeah.
Came through Unsigned Hype. Back then it was called Common Sense. Produced by No ID. Even back then.
Yeah.
And then there was Mobb Deep, who were originally called. I know Never knows, but I'm wondering if the young boys know.
Nope,
I definitely don't know.
The young boys know Mobb Deep's original name.
Nope. I'll tell you that off the bat.
Go ahead.
Poetical Prophets.
Shit.
Poetical Prophets.
Thank God they changed
You know,
that.
I didn't
Yes.
even know that shit.
Yeah.
Poetical Prophets.
The original Mobb Deep was Poetical Prophets.
Even in the Unsigned Hype, that was put on their name put on. I can't think of it right now, but he just said it. But yeah,
I just remember their first
Political
single,
Prophets,
man.
yeah.
Their first single was like, what was it? Back It Up or like
Hit 'em from the back.
Hit it from the back.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Actually,
Yeah.
that one, that was the B side.
What was the A side?
Peer Pressure.
Oh,
Peer
that's
pressure,
right.
yes, right.
You're right.
Wow.
You're right.
Yeah.
Fuck, man.
But Hit 'em from the back was sort of like the video, I think.
Yeah.
I think
they did a video for that one.
Yeah. I mean, at any rate, Matt, they came through Unsigned Hype, and Matt shepherded sort of their career, and that's why they ended up signing to Loud, and that's why when they blew up on Loud, it was kind of following that first album. The second album was the one that blew up. But yeah, I mean, just you guys, my mind is now kind of spinning thinking about that era. Other groups I want to mention would be Das Effects, Brand Nubian. I mean, of course,
Brand Nubian, really?
Tribe Called Quest. No, not for Unsigned Hype, but just in general.
Oh,
This
yeah,
era.
that era,
I just
yeah,
want to say these names because before we move on to the next chapter, I just these are the source era for me is about Brand Nubian, Das Effects,
Yeah.
Gangstar, of course. Of course, Quest. Second, third album,
De La.
De La.
I read that you guys had I guess it was a Source tour. So it said like Cypress Hill, Das Effects. Was that part of kind of like introducing the world to some of the Unsigned Hype talent, or was that something completely different?
Yeah, that was we did a bunch of things like tours and shows and like van tours and stuff like that. And there was one amazing show that I think you're referring to in New York with. It was Cypress, Das Effects, and Gangstar, and that I remember being one of the most insane nights in my hip hop life.
Wow!
For some reason, that it was right when Killer Man was at its peak.
It's my favorite records ever.
Yeah, and that record just people were jumping off the ceiling.
Did people, in your interpretation, did people think that Cypress Hill was from New York? Because even growing up on the West Coast, that was the kind of perception.
Yeah, they definitely had a New York sound. I think that's kind of why they were different. Muggs brought that sort of New York feel. They were a very influential group that era as well, for sure.
That whole era was actually my high school. So that was my...
What years was that?
That was when I was 7th, 8th grade.
Early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say 91 was Brand Nubian, One for All.
Yeah.
I think.
90, 91.
90, 91.
Actually, yeah. Mhm.
That was 7th, 8th grade for me. De La Soul is Dead changed my life.
Nice.
and then Low in Theory just blew me away, and it was just everything after that was high school. So what he's talking about was my high school era, when I was coming up. So
That's crazy.
the Source was a big part of that. It was when that we would run to the newsstands to get it. You know what I'm saying? And it was just I can't even explain what it was. And one of us would have it, and then they'd be
5 of y'all?
yeah, 5 of us reading one issue.
No, it was so many groups that I never heard of until I read The Source, and you talked about them, leaders in the new school.
Yeah.
That was one of the first times I heard about them through The Source magazine. Even the Stretch and Barbita show, I didn't know about it
Oh,
till you
interesting.
put it
Interesting.
in the Source magazine.
Interesting. Yeah. Main Source is another one that from that era that was the only people that ever. One of the few people that ever thanked us for a good review was Main Source. People were not like. The only time we'd hear from people was when they were pissed off. We would never hear from anybody when they were happy, except for Main Source. Their mom managed them, and she brought me a bottle of scotch, I remember, when we gave them 5. We gave them a 5 mic on the single, I think. And at one point we rated singles, and we stopped rating singles, only rated albums. But when we still rated singles, we gave Looking Out the Front Door, which, let's face it, is a hip-hop classic, a 5 mic, and they appreciated it.
Wow.
What's been one of the worst responses you've ever had?
I mean, I've been, we've had a lot of artists that were not happy about some things that were written.
Yeah.
For me personally, I mean, coming back to KRS, because at one point he put out a record called Human Education Against Lies. You might remember.
Yeah.
It was called the Heal Movement.
Yeah.
And this was after Self-Destruction, because Self-Destruction blew up, and that was like a hit in the hip-hop world.
Yeah.
And that was like a very positive message where all these artists came together and did something good. Then he tried to follow it up like a year or two later with Heal, which
That was
not a good
Let's keep
record.
it real. It was kind of whack.
No, it's terrible.
It was
I don't
probably
care.
his worst work, right?
I mean, even if he's,
bad.
I'll tell this to Chris's face. I mean, I'm not, I don't want to insult the man, but the truth is, it wasn't his best work.
Right.
And so, Matt C. Again, now he writes a review where he's honest about it, and we published it. And I remember that Chris was absolutely furious at me, at Matt, at the magazine. The relationship is over. The relationship is over. I remember he was screaming that on the phone. And, but that was just one of many, don't want to dwell on all the bad things, but there was a lot of people that were angry about reviews, and sometimes they're angry about things that had nothing to do with us, like a picture where someone's in the background flashing a gang sign pisses off somebody, and I start hearing about it.
Didn't you guys piss off Public Enemy at one point?
Yes, there was, another incident.
And they actually had a video.
Yes.
They had somebody playing you in the video, right?
Yes, that's such. I love that you know that, because that's like the smallest little piece of hip hop trivia. Like, that video almost never got seen, like maybe once anywhere. But there was a time when Public Enemy. Now, one of my partners in the Source was a guy named James Bernard, who was a very, kind of edgy, sort of intellectual, who took a lot of stances on a lot of issues, and he took a stance against Public Enemy about something they were doing, whether it was creative or something about their message that he didn't like. He also, by the way, had a tattoo of the Public Enemy logo on his arm, so he loved Public Enemy. But whatever it was, I don't remember exactly, but something happened around Fear of a Black Planet time that he didn't, maybe that he just didn't like that album, and so they ended up getting furious and so angry that they made a whole video where there's a guy playing me. James was like, we were kind of partners running the editorial side, so I was editor-in-chief, he was like editorial director, whatever, we were basically together running the whole thing, and he triggered this anger from Chuck D, and then they ended up making a video. And it was weird. It was really weird, and no one ever saw it because the song was like, it was actually like a shitty song. So the video never got played. So
what song was it? Do you remember?
I honestly don't remember.
I forgot what song it was, but I forgot which song. Yeah, but I did remember that incident. Happening.
It's a very small piece of hip hop trivia. Yes.
So like when you were the editor there, I mean, I have 2 questions. One, I mean, how crazy was it to finish an issue? Was it always a scramble to the very end? Was it always like a total shit show until like the last day of pressing? And then 2, at what point did it ever was it ever smooth, and was it ever just kind of working? And then at what point were you kind of over it?
Well, all great questions, because no one's ever asked me about that before. That's like, the truth is that it was almost always a scramble. The truth is that it was never a well-oiled machine, because it was, we were pioneering new ground. I'm not making any excuse or anything, but it wasn't easy to pull together an issue every month. There were so many moving parts, so many writers, so many things, and we were very basically understaffed the whole time. You know what I mean? So yes, we put out an issue every month, but yes, every month there was a lot of work down to the last wire of finishing the issue. Of course, we also evolved with technology because the very early days of The Source, we used the original Apple Macintosh, which you remember that was shaped like this, the rectangle shape.
Yeah.
And like we used the earliest software to make magazines, which was PageMaker, Quark Express and PageMaker. And you would move, if you move one thing, the whole page has to rebuild itself. So it would take like hours to lay out one page, because of that, because of technology. We were fighting with the technology of the time. Then as technology got better, our system got better,
right.
So it was always a scramble, but it always felt great to get the issue out. That was kind of like the monthly cycle. Like when the issue was fully out the door, we felt great about it. And the biggest things people always wanted to know was who's on the cover and what rating did something get. Like that's it. That was the main thing. Oh, then the third thing, how much money is somebody making? That was always the big question we always got. That's why we always did those. We did features sometimes with rappers in their cars, and that's kind of why we started doing stuff like that, because there was this constant stream of mail, like about asking how much money people are making. I mean, you understand, again, this is pre-internet. People are just reaching out because we're like the only thing that they got,
I have a question. I actually know this, but I don't think these guys know about Illmatic. You first had the album like 6 months before it came out, right? And you did the review on it, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, what happened was with Illmatic was a great special story. Basically, I knew this guy named Chris Schwartz in Philly. He ran Rough House Records. Rough House Records became famous for the Fugees, Lauryn Hill, and Cypress Hill, and a few other artists. Chris Cross was on Rough House. Yeah. So they had a lot of hits.
And they were joined with like
Tim Dog was
Columbia.
Yeah.
Tim Dog.
Tim Dog, yeah.
So they had a hot streak. They got really hot, and they were making hits. And Chris Schwartz had been around the Philly hip hop scene longer than me. He's like older than me. He was a guy that I always wanted to be down with because he was ahead of me in the hip hop world. Another white guy in Philly ahead of me. So he had built up Rough House, and Source was running, and I went to a meeting in his office in the suburbs of Philly. And it was like a really messy desk with like piles of papers and everything. And he's like, we did the whole interview, or I forget what I did, whatever business I was there to do. And then I said, hey man, I heard you're working with this guy Nas. Now at that point we had only heard Halftime,
right?
And
Live at the Barbecue.
Live at the Barbecue, Halftime, and is that it? Oh, that was it.
Back to the Grill.
Back to the Grill.
Back to the Grill. And so just from Halftime alone, we were going crazy because we love this guy Nas, and of course the Live at the Barbecue also. Those are the records that people were like, who is this guy? Like he's incredible. So I asked Chris Schwartz about Nas, and he's like, oh, you know about him? You've heard of him? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah. We're like loving his stuff so far. He's like, he looks around this messy desk, he pulls up a blank like black cassette, like just an unlabeled black cassette. He's like, here, check this out. Take this. And I was like, oh, this is Nas? He's like, yeah, just take it. So I was like, cool. I put it in my pocket, finish the meeting, get back on the Amtrak train, going back to New York, pop in the tape deck, and it's the entire Illmatic album, like 8 months before it came out.
Fuck.
Okay? He just handed me pretty much the best album in hip-hop history, like, without even thinking about it, what I was going to do with it. He didn't even say, like, don't tape it for anybody. Back then people would dub cassettes.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't, but, like, everyone would, And
how was that first listen?
Okay.
Shit.
I mean, I remember almost feeling like an out-of-body experience, like listening to that album on the way back. And then when I got to One Love, that was the one that really did it for me. When I heard One Love with those xylophone strings and Q-Tip and, and then just the vibe of that. And then the lyrics were so deep and so just intense. And like, I remember just by the time I got to New York, I knew that this was just a groundbreaking classic album. So I rushed down to the Source office. It's like 9 o'clock at night. And I get there, and a few people are there. Matty C, this guy Scott Free, who's another former Loud executive. Reef, Rob Tulo was there. And we pop in the tape, and then I played it for everybody. And then So then we all just were blown away, and then we had to sit on it for like 8 months.
That's hard.
Yeah,
Pause.
we had to sit. Yeah.
We had to sit on it.
Hey yo.
Illmatic.
Hey yo. So that was a difficult. But then the album ended up leaking. It wasn't from us. At least it wasn't from me. I never dubbed that copy, and I still have it.
Really?
Yes. And,
Damn.
but the album ended up leaking. So
Yeah, big time.
Big
man.
time.
Everybody, it was on every mixtape that came out
Yeah.
at that time. That had the album,
How long before it came out?
like months before the album
Yeah.
came out.
that's why it was never like a huge seller.
Yeah,
Because
'cause
like all that demand was satisfied by
Everybody
people
knew
leaking.
the songs on the album already.
But
before
is
it came out.
that a typical rollout time for an album? That sounds like a long time to hold it for 8 months, nah?
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, absolutely. I mean, probably because they were integrated. I mean, first of all, Nas was a very edgy artist. I mean, he was like
Right.
talking about, I'm pulling automatic guns
Guns
and
and
nuns
nuns.
and stuff. So, and
He might have been one of the first, like, I would say Eminem-esque, like, shock lyrical dude that said said about Jesus, I'm snuffing Jesus in the live at the barbecue. Like, he said a lot of fucked up shit.
Yeah.
And he was like a shock rapper at the time. And I remember, like, I mean, now that it makes sense that you guys had it for 8 months, because when you guys were like, I remember you guys really kind of amped that whole album up.
So yeah, there was a review that was written by Miss Info, Minya O.
Yeah.
And I did a story where I interviewed Nas, and then I interviewed
Every
all the
producers.
producers.
Yes,
So
I
it was
remember that.
Pete Rock, Q-Tip, Large Professor, Premier. So think about like just
Crazy.
that right there. That's like the golden era right there, basically. But so. That story came out, and we called him the Second Coming, which was obviously a reference to Rakim, but it was kind of more vague, like he's the second, he's raps Jesus, whatever you want to call it, he's the guy that's going to save hip hop, basically.
Yeah.
And everyone, the album ended up, that one we were right about. We weren't right about everything, but I think that one, we ended up being right about.
Crazy.
Yeah.
yo.
Man.
I remember like being in high school and just like hanging with my boys and shit, and we're like looking at that article, and we kind of knew about Nas, but we didn't really know that much. To the point where we're reading this and like, yo, I'm like, why are all these fucking producers like? Because this is the first time you saw all of the best producers working on one project.
Yeah, it was one of the first.
Because
times.
P Rock was this CL Smooth, and then P Rock would do like a remix for a single.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like Premier would only work with like Gangstar
Gangstar.
group, like all the homies, right? Very rarely did he work outside. And it was just kind of one of those things where you're like, why all these motherfuckers like batting for this one dude? And then you guys had that huge like, feature in there, and we're like, damn, this was maybe gonna be a big thing, and we didn't realize it till we like listened to it. We're like, yo, this shit is crazy.
Yeah.
But I was just always wondering in my head, like, like you guys were sitting on that for 8 months, just like
That was
holding that in.
That and Brand Nubian was a similar story in terms of sitting on it for a long time, and that also leaked. If you remember, Brand Nubian was another one that lit up the streets well before it was actually released. So they never got the benefit of the sales they should have gotten because of that.
And also the bootleggers are selling their mixtapes as well.
Yeah, bootlegging back then. Bootlegging, which was like manual copying of cassettes.
It was a big problem back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, $2 for a whole album. You know what I mean?
And it
Yeah,
sounded
Crazy.
good
and
quality.
it sounded good quality. Wait,
I can't front. Yeah,
but
I
shit,
gotta-
do you have any info on why they would wait 8 months? Like, why would they push that so long?
The people who would know that is Faith Newman, who is the A&R person at Columbia.
I was about to say, Columbia didn't really have any hip hop artists at the time, right?
It was curious. It was
straight-
like Curious George and Nas.
Yeah, they were both in the same circle. Yeah, and I mean the same like little crew. And also we should mention Search, because Search was actually instrumental
Right.
in
Yeah.
getting Nas signed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only reason why I know Curious George, you guys might not know who Curious is because he lived in my building.
Yeah. He told me that.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you know Sear too back then?
Yeah,
Lord
I used to
Sear?
see him all the time. Like him, Cotty.
Cotty.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
Killer Cotty.
Yeah, all those dudes, they were in my building, man. So like, I would see them like when Walk Like a Duck came out, and then Uptown Shit was like our anthem. We were like, yo, this is the shit. But like,
Where was
Yeah.
that building?
it was 97 Columbus and Amsterdam.
Okay.
So he was on 120, like up there in the Upper West in Manhattan, and then we'd always be like around the Goat Park,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the only reason why we were like
Sierra
mad
had
proud.
the big afro back then, right?
Yeah, the
Sierra had
huge
the
afro.
huge afro. Yeah.
Before he had to cut that shit. Yeah.
That's fucking dope, yo. That's
Was there
awesome.
was there camaraderie amongst publications? Like I know in '93 Quincy Jones started Vibe magazine. So did you guys view like maybe Vibe as like a rival, or like other magazines as rivals, or is that something that you guys like openly like work together, or maybe like passed talent to each other, or how did it work with that stuff?
Okay, good question. Vibe, basically more a rivalry. We were not working with anybody else. There was a rivalry between the magazines. There was Vibe, and I'll tell you the story behind that is that myself, Dave Mays, James Bernard, and Ed Young, who are the four main founders of The Source, sat in Quincy Jones's house right after that Slick Rick issue came out, the blue one with Slick Rick on the cover.
I remember that.
Okay, right after that came out, I remember that was our newest issue. I think it was 92. We were sitting in Quincy Jones's house with Russell Simmons, Quincy Jones, and about 15 guys in suits from Time Warner. And they were basically going to buy The Source.
Wow.
And obviously that deal didn't end up happening. They offered us some small amount of money, and they basically didn't give us a proper treatment in the end. But basically that was why they started Vibe, because they came to The Source, they wanted to buy The Source, we were there, and then they went off and did their own thing. Vibe came out the gate, and we were very concerned at first because here's Time Warner and Quincy Jones and Russell Simmons teaming up to do a hip-hop magazine. What are we going to do? We're just like a bunch of guys with no real money behind us, no real budget. And the craziest, as with all things, it's not quite what you expect, the way things turn out, because basically what ended up happening is they put out this very high-end, Tretch was on the first cover, I remember, lots of fashion, lots of products, and lots of more mainstream things, and that ended up helping us, not hurting us, because all these advertisers now had hip-hop on their radar, people that we would never have reached, clothing, soft drinks, cars, and electronics, things that we were only focused on record labels and then a little bit of clothing and whoever was hip-hop.
Right.
But now Mountain Dew is interested, and different car brands and things like that.
So they opened the market almost for you guys.
So we were like, at first we were like, what's going to happen? And we didn't thought they could outspend us and crush us.
Right.
But in the end, it ended up boosting us, and it made The Source better and increased our advertising by a huge amount.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then, so I think this was in The Source because my memory is pretty bad. But how was it working with Russell Simmons? Did you ever have to like work with him in The Source? Because I remember an incident, and I remember 14 Shots to the Dome. Is that the LL Cool J album?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was it that you guys did a bad review, or you guys were gonna do a bad review on that, and it was the album after Mama Said Knock You Out?
I don't often talk about this, but the only issue I remember with Russell had to do with a different album with Pete Nice. Pete Nice's solo album. And I love Pete Nice. And by the way, I'm
Pete Nice
friends
from
with
Third
him.
Base, yeah.
From Third Base.
Yeah.
I'm friends with him. We've recently reconnected. He's a very smart, knowledgeable hip-hop historian, more so than almost anyone I've ever met. His knowledge of 70s and 80s hip-hop is beyond compare. At the time, however, his album, I wasn't a big fan of it. And I remember covering it, whether it was an interview or it wasn't a review, it was like a feature story. And I think I was honest about my feelings about the album. And in that article, I mentioned something that Russell had said, where Russell admitted that he didn't really like it either.
Really?
Yeah, like Russell admitted to me somewhere, some interview, and I had my tape recorder. He said, "Nah, I mean that shit ain't that good," or something like that, right? And so I printed it, and it was like the shit hit the fan, And he was the one screaming on the phone that day, and whatever, he said it, so I wasn't wrong to print it. I mean, I didn't lie. I told the truth, but with hip hop, as with all industries, there's politics and all that. So I probably could have said it in a more delicate way so as not to, like, step on people's toes,
Right.
Yeah.
But speaking of Russell, because he's been in the news.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit too much.
I mean, what are your thoughts on all of this? By the way, I got more water.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on all of this? Like, obviously, all this sexual assault, all the sexual stuff that's going on, and obviously, it's a touchy subject, but I think it's very, very. I mean, if you want to talk about the most misogynistic music genre, I mean, hip hop has got to be up there, right? Next to rock, maybe.
Hip hop and reggae.
Reggae. God damn, yeah.
No, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I follow it. I mean, now I know a few of the people that have been accused of things, such as Russell and Brett Ratner. And, honestly, the way I feel is if you're guilty of mistreating a woman, you deserve to be called out for it, and you probably deserve to have some, if not punishment, some penalty or something against you for doing that. None of these guys have to have sex with that woman right now. We all are attracted to different women as we go through life,
right.
And we don't force ourselves on them. There's a way to approach a woman, whatever age you are, and whatever amount of money you have in your pocket, and whoever you are in life. We don't have to force a woman to touch us or to kiss us or to do anything else. So when I hear these stories, I mean, I generally believe the women, and I think that anyone who did these kind of things needs to look in the mirror and tell the truth about it. And, I'm not saying they should be thrown under the jail or anything,
right,
unless it was really severe. But, I think that where there's smoke, there's fire, typically. I mean, no one – there's been a lot of people saying the other side, like, you can't – people are being falsely accused. And maybe that's true to some extent also. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's some people that are being falsely accused.
I mean, because, there's a lot of – I mean, some of it came up, but it was, I mean, the biggest one for us would probably be with, like, Tupac, right? That happened around that same time as, like, Mike Tyson and all that was going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess I bring this up kind of because, have you seen the Stretch and Bobbito documentary?
Of course. It's fantastic.
It's great.
Yeah.
And then they kind of interviewed, like, I forgot one of the shorties that was in the beginning of the radio show, but she was, like, the only female.
I know who you're talking about.
I forgot her name. But she was the only female.
She's still in the industry now.
She's still in it, but she was the only female in that room with a bunch of hip-hop dudes on this radio show. And, it was not easy. It was she was getting picked up all the time.
Are you talking about Mimi Valdez?
There we go. That's what it is.
You're talking about Mimi Valdez.
Yeah,
I know Mimi. Yeah, she became later like the editor of Vibe and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I know there was some writers, I don't know, like Dream Hampton, right?
Yeah.
is a big one. But I know like it wasn't easy for females in the beginning of hip hop to really, number one, get taken seriously, be respected, or anything like that. So like, I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering, as you were going through, did you see a lot of that and a lot of mistreatment, or do you think there's more shit that's gonna get like kind of thrown into the press later, or like? Or
yeah, I mean, there's been a few stories like that lately. And you asked earlier about like the music itself. I mean, when I listen to, we mentioned NWA, and one of the things that's weird about NWA is that they have incredibly misogynistic music, like beyond the top, like almost like a cartoon level of misogyny.
Yeah.
Like there's one song called "One Less Bitch." You know that song? And Dre is describing murdering women and like throwing their bodies away because they did something wrong, whatever. So it's like there's crazy messages. And back then, this is basically a fault in myself, I feel, is that I ignored it. All of us guys back then ignored that message. They were like, oh yeah, that's just, they're just talking shit. They're just they're just like talking shit or whatever. But in the end, that did hurt people because that, like, somewhere down the line, somebody probably did something bad to a girl because you heard them saying that on that song. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a certain level of like humor to it all, right? Like we didn't take it seriously, so that we just kind of laughed at it. And the more over the top it was, the more like dirty and like
the Ghetto Boys, for example.
Yeah.
The Ghetto Boys were totally cartoonish violence, like right? I mean, but I like the Ghetto Boys. But I'm just saying, like, especially like Scarface. I think Scarface is awesome. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. There's definitely some problems with hip hop when it comes to misogyny. And I think this movement happening now it's good. I mean, I don't have any patience for that anymore. Like when I hear anyone doing that stuff, I just literally turn it off. Like I have no desire to hear those messages. But I also understand what an 18 or 21-year-old kid thinks about. You know, you're not thinking about that. You just love what's hot right now. And if this edgy stuff is hot right now, then you're there.
And then things was different back then, like the 80s, 90s. It is right now.
It is. It's funny though, like, but I see the new, like, I look at the new music now, right? And I'm like, God, these dudes are such idiots. Like they're throwing guns around. They're just acting stupid. They're treating chicks like shit. And then I'm just thinking, like, wait. I mean, I kind of grew up on the same thing in a different form.
Yeah.
But it's basically the same shit. I mean, I grew up to. I mean, I was listening to 2 Live Crew too, and I was listening to like. You know, Pimpin' Ain't Easy, Big Daddy Kane.
Slick Rick treated like a prostitute.
Yeah, I mean,
Like-
that shit is crazy. I mean, honestly, like, and I'm thinking like, wow, I mean, I'm just showing my age and my maturity at this point, right? But, I mean, I guess, I don't know, call me crazy. I want to say it's worse now, but, you know, there's a part of me that like, is it really worse? Because it was pretty bad back then. The only thing I think is worse is that hip-hop has a much louder voice. So that, like,
Yeah.
The stuff that we were listening to was really centralized to like maybe like, you know,
500,000 people.
500,000,
Yeah.
maybe 1 million. Now it's
Yeah.
like, you know, fucking
And
hundreds
there was
of
a
millions.
level of humor to it too. There was a level of humor, like even like "I Ain't the One" on NWA's album.
Oh, yeah.
I used to like walk around the house singing that with my mom. Like we would be laughing, like "Bitch, I ain't the one." Like
I
my
love
mom
that
was like really big into hip hop.
I don't know. I don't know what household you grew up in, man.
Hey man, Inglewood, California. But
Because I ain't the one.
yeah, like my mom would blast that song in the house, and I just to this day like it's very strong in my memory about that song what Ice Cube was saying, but he said it in such a humorous way that it made light of it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you listen to any hip hop? Like what? Like, you know,
A little
what do you
bit.
think of it? What do you look? How do you look at it now?
Is there anybody you would put in the Unsigned Hype column now?
I mean, you know, I guess, how do I look at hip hop now? I mean, I've stopped feeling like I'm the target audience, so I no longer feel like I'm the one that they're doing that's supposed to understand it. In other words, like, I'm okay with that, you know? Like, there's a lot of different styles now, and it's, what I really feel is like there's very few artists that are actually rapping in the way that I consider quality hip hop to be. Like, you know, that would be guys like Joey Badass or something like that, or a guy that's quality. They're saying something. You know, very few of the artists. But then again, you have guys like let's say Drake, for example. Like Drake, you know, it's easy to like make fun of him, but he's making a lot of great songs, lots of hits, you know. And I actually don't mind Drake. I like Drake. But all the quote unquote mumble rap, you know, most of it, you know, goes past me. I don't really care about one versus the other. I mean, once in a while you hear a beat and people like it and you hear it a lot, and maybe I might like it a little bit.
Right.
You know what I mean? But in general, all that stuff from like the Migos generation, just I don't pay attention.
What would you say is like one of your favorite albums of last year? Like Jay-Z
Hip hop albums,
444,
or
yeah.
What? Let me see. What else? Would
I'm curious to
Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
curious to know how you feel about Kendrick Lamar's.
Yeah, Kendrick, I should mention, is another quality MC who's obviously saying, like, I like when rappers say something, you know, like not just rhyme well. Jay-Z, of course.
J. Cole.
Yeah, J. Cole is a good one. I'm trying to think who else is put out albums last year. If you have any, I love that Tribe Called Quest album, of course.
Yeah.
That was.
Did you feel
That
like they
got-
should have had the Grammy?
Yeah, that
nomination?
got, you know, that got very little. I mean, that was big in hip hop right around the time Trump got elected. Remember that came out?
Yeah.
And like that was like my like release valve for like when Trump got elected. I was like, man, let's all rally around this Tribe Called Quest album. But then I realized that not that many people were really rallying or were that into it. Like it was a limited kind of impact. And I spoke to some very influential friends in the music industry, and they didn't even like it. And I was like, what? Like, you don't even like it? And they're like, no, they loved, what's his name? What's that guy from Philly? I'm blanking on his name.
Meek Mill?
No, the other one.
Lil Uzi?
Yeah, Little Uzi Vert. They were like, no, this is what's happening.
Wow.
It was Little Uzi Vert. They're like, not Tribe Called Quest, Little Uzi Vert. And I was like, and I listened to it, and I'm like, okay, I mean, look, he ended up being right. That Little Uzi Vert was like a phenomenon, right? So, but I would never have called that. I would never have picked that. You know?
Tribe? Nope.
What did you think of the 444 album?
I thought it was pretty clever. I thought there was a lot of really good rhymes on it. I love that video they did.
Right. Which one?
Yeah, they did a video for a lot.
The OJ?
They did a video for the whole album. Just
Oh, that's right.
Story of OJ, was it?
Yeah, that one.
That was
right.
that one.
Yeah.
Cartoon one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought the story of OJ was the closest thing to like real hip hop that I've heard and seen in a minute, with that kind of video where it reminded me as like something from the 90s from like a Native Tongue or like a X-Clan, where it was very much informative and it made you almost like kind of change your perception on how you're living your life and what's really going on.
Yeah.
And I thought it was I don't know. I thought it was one of those things that took me back, and it was the closest thing I could think of to like what would you call that? Not I don't know. Fucking revolutionary rap, or what the fuck were they calling that shit?
Yeah, that's a
back
good
then?
one.
Yeah, like X-Clan.
Yeah, Jungle Brothers, the whole Native Tongue movement kind of.
Yeah.
But
We're gonna talk about DJs.
yeah,
probably
I
get there.
want to move there.
We're
Yeah.
passing the 90s right now, so we're
Okay.
at the 2000 now.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's go to 2000. What year did you get here?
Well, yeah,
Vegas. 2003?
yeah. Let's
No,
talk
I'm
about
talking
that. Yeah, let's talk about that.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
I don't
let's
want to
do
jump
it.
ahead. Okay. Well, for Vegas, for me, 03. 03 was when I officially moved here. I started hanging out here in the late 90s, though. So I was always drawn to Vegas because I play poker, and I just was drawn to the excitement of Vegas and so forth. And, I ended up coming here in 03. And as far as DJs, back then was right when the club scene was starting here. So that was like light nightclub.
That's when I just moved out here in 03 as well.
You too, yeah. So that was literally the beginning of the sort of quote unquote upscale or bottle service like nightclubs. Before that, there was like 2 or 3 clubs. There was R.O.A.D, the Luxor with War and Peace. There was what's the one that was on the Strip, the standalone one that was like a house club, Utopia. It's called Utopia, and there was like there was something at Rio.
Rio. It was Club Rio, right?
Yeah. There was, and so I went to those clubs and they were shitty, and whatever. I'm not trying to diss anyone, but basically back then, pre this new era. So then 2003 comes along.
Right.
And there was a lot of opportunity because everyone was trying to do basically a New York style of club. And I had been, spending many years in New York City. And because of my relationships with DJs like DJ AM, Mark Ronson, and Stretch Armstrong in particular, I started getting involved in booking DJs. Start initially with the Light Group with Sean Christie when he was still working as like the director of marketing under Andrew Sasson. And the first gig that we ever booked was, we called it the Big City DJ Series. And I think it was 03 or 04 around that time.
I think it was 03.
Yep, and that
It was
was
literally called the Big City
DJ Series, and it starred
And you had DJ cards.
Playing
for that,
cards.
right? Playing cards.
we made playing cards, and it was Mark Ronson, DJ AM, Stretch Armstrong, and Eddie McDonald, because Eddie McDonald was basically the staff DJ for nightclub.
That's before never you moved out to
I
Vegas.
had just moved out here.
Okay.
Like,
And then
just like I moved out April of 2003.
Eddie McDonald moved in. Eddie's from Jersey, but he was
He moved out a year before.
A year before you.
2002.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got it. And then honestly, what brought you to Vegas? And then, because I have a theory, and
You're probably right.
And
Yeah,
then
go ahead.
I have a theory on why you came to Vegas. And then another thing was, how were you tapped into all of these DJs like Mark Ronson? And I know AM is from Philly, you know what I mean? So, but how did that relationship evolve, or how did that come about? You know what I mean? Because
Well-
he's a West Coast. He was on the.
Who was on the West? Mark?
No, AM was on the West Coast.
He was in LA. Okay, so look, having grown up in the hip hop world for so many years, I just knew a lot of DJs. I mean, it's just the way it is. You go to clubs, you know DJs. But then beyond that, even on a personal level, I ended up, becoming good friends with all those guys. All the guys we mentioned were just like close friends of mine. Stretch, Mark Ronson, and AM. Through different directions, different like connections, whatever, they became friends, and I've always been sort of friend of DJ. That's like one of my roles in life. I used to have that on my Twitter. I took it off, but it's like I'm just, for some reason, I find myself very naturally in the role of friend of a DJ, the guy that they hang out with after the party and stuff like that. Thank you. Some water's being delivered.
Thank you.
But yeah, so in that role, I just ended up, because what do we all do when we walk into a club? Walk right to the DJ booth. I've always done that, even when I was like 20 years old. I would walk into a club, I want to go right to the DJ booth and either hang out with them or just watch what they were doing, see what records they're playing, watch the crowd, that whole thing. So
it's always the safest room in the club.
Yeah,
and it's the best, and it's the best view in the club.
Yeah. It's like a safe space. It's like if you can be in there, if you get in there, if you're allowed for whatever reason to get into the booth. It's a safe space where you can enjoy the music, and if you're music oriented, if you're not there for another, if you're there for the music primarily,
you're seeing the next record getting played. You're kind of like seeing what's about to happen in the club. It's like probably the best room, the safest room that I would be in,
especially with AM. Because AM was such a unbelievable hard worker behind the turntables, a guy who, the hardest working man in the DJ business till this day, who never stopped doing something. He was always cueing, mixing, scratching, blending, echoing, fading, something.
And lighting a cigarette and smoking a cigarette.
Drinking Red Bull, smoking a cigarette.
And making it look super easy at the same time.
Super dope at the same time.
We were just saying that on one of our podcasts that we ranked him probably one of the coolest looking DJs. Like,
if not,
you know what I mean?
It looked dope.
But you know what I mean? He would be like transforming, and he'd still have a cigarette in his mouth or on his finger while he's scratching. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
He almost like made me want to start smoking just because it looked cool.
It's a pro smoking advertisement, but. And that's funny. You saying that reminds me of another image from the past, similar era. DJ Riz, who I know you mentioned, may be a guest on this show.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
One of the homies and one of the best DJs ever. He used to put the records in his mouth. You remember this? He would be DJing. There would be two pieces of vinyl, and then there'd be two on the turntables and two more in his mouth, because he was already thinking what the next thing was going to be, and he wanted it that fast.
Yeah,
he wanted to cue it up that fast, so he would DJ most of the night with one or two records in his mouth. Okay, that's how fast pre-Serato.
Yeah,
that's how fast he wanted it to be. That was his technique for increasing the speed of getting the next record on. And he was great at speed mixing.
He was
nasty. Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, he kind of coined that whole, I would say that definitive
style,
club, that quick mixing, New York, fast, hit him on the one, bring it back. He was, I would say he's one of the first dudes that I heard that really did that shit.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And then, so then, all right, I got to talk about this because I'm a big fan. It affected me a lot. This was at the time of Fat Beat Records, independent. I'm talking about like the Arsonists were big. Company Flow was big. Independent underground hip hop was emerging. You had who was some of the poster children of underground hip hop at that time?
The Raucous era? You mean
Raucous,
like
Mos Def,
Pharoah Monch,
Reflections Eternal,
Talib
Kweli.
Yeah.
There's some other big ones. Pause.
I want to say Tech 9.
Royce the 5'9".
Royce the 5'9". Okay, so this is what I want to talk about is Game Records.
Sure.
One of my favorite indie record hip hop companies that you started, right? And Game Records were known for a couple of things. They were known for they had the best like LP record covers, right? They had the best covers because it was all like were they porn stars?
No,
kind of
multicultural young ladies.
Yeah, it was all like the flyest, like Latin, Black, Asian girls in like bikinis, thongs on the covers, but it had like Royce the 5'9" and Eminem on it. Who's the dude that who sampled the price? Is it the Price is Right?
Lord Digger.
Digger.
I love that song. Yeah,
that song was one of the illest songs ever.
Yeah,
it's kind. In a weird way, we talked about Fresh Prince. Girls of the World. It's kind of similar. It's
kind of a similar type
of song. It was like more underground though, man.
It's very similar. It's a TV theme song. Yeah. Well, after The Source, I got into putting out records. I wanted to be on that side of the business. So Game Records was born in like the sort of 97, 98, around that time. And we had a nice run, put out a bunch of records with some of the names you mentioned, Royce, Eminem, Lord Digga.
I want to say that was obviously the beginning of Bad Meets Evil.
Yeah.
Royce the 5'9" and Eminem.
Yeah.
And I want to say it might be possibly one of the first or second pressings of Eminem in his.
You're right.
Right?
Yeah, it was the first record. Scary Movies.
It was on Scary Movie.
Scary Movies and Nothing to Do. Scary
to Do.
Movies got played on Funkmaster Flex, and it got played on the LA, whatever was either K-Day or whatever the other station in LA.
K-Day.
Before any Eminem song. That was the first Eminem song to ever hit the radio. The only thing he had before that was his EP.
Right.
So his little EP, which has Cursing Out You Players Worse Than Marty Schottenheimer, that
I don't give a fuck.
I don't give a
right?
fuck.
Yeah.
I just don't give a fuck.
I just don't give a yeah.
So that he had his EP out with his like 6 songs, which were great. And long story short, I ended up meeting Paul Rosenberg, who was Eminem's manager, and I said, "Hey, man!" And so Eminem was already signed to Interscope, but the album had not come out yet. So it was like this period of time where most of the album was done, including My Name Is and all those songs. And they were eager to make a deal because they needed to eat, And I said, "Hey, is there any way that we can do like an indie record? I know you have the deal with Interscope." And that's why we did Bad Meets Evil, because it wasn't called Eminem.
Right.
It was called Bad Meets Evil.
Yeah.
So we sidestepped the whole Interscope thing. And, what happened was right after Bad Meets Evil, that's when My Name Is came out, like a month later or something, and then it was off to the moon,
Nothing to Do was honestly one of my favorite. Like, I think that could have been like a huge club hit if like there was a video or something.
Produced by Reef, Rob Tulo.
Really, I'm telling you, like that song, like just hit. And
Yeah.
I remember I used to scratch because Eminem said "crooked."
Oh.
Look at my, it's crooked, and I used to just scratch. It's crooked, it's crooked, and I was like, "Yo, this is." And I bought 4 of those records because I was just wearing out.
Oh, you were the one.
vinyl.
Okay,
Yeah, I was.
You're the source.
No, we had a nice run. That record obviously was a big hit for the underground side, and also Boom by
Boom,
Royce
yeah.
the 5'9". Those were our 2 biggest hits.
That's Premiere, right?
Primo and Royce together.
Now they're
Boom.
doing Prime, which is
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
Now I got a question about Boom. There's 2 versions. There's one with scratches.
There's a good version and there's a commercialized crappy version. The good version,
There's scratches.
the one with the scratches, it's harder, and it
the
doesn't
second
have
one
has a silly chorus.
Was
in it.
Royce singing almost, right?
Yeah, and it was stupid. And
Did you do that for radio?
what happened was that whole project, to be honest, and me and Royce are very cool, and I love Royce to this day. He's a great, great human being on so many levels. At that time, we were both kind of swept up in the moment, and we signed as an album project to Columbia Records, again, different Columbia Records era, and it got too many cooks problem, basically, is what ended up happening. And they ended up veering away from the original vision, and the biggest example of that is redoing Boom, which was already such a great record, and trying to make it have a chorus. It didn't really have a chorus, so they wanted to add a chorus. So Donnie Einer, who was the president of Columbia Records, we sat in his office, and he's like, "I love this record. This is going to be huge, but you need to add a chorus." So Royce went and made that second version, which doesn't hit as hard.
Right.
But the first one is still a classic, and I hear people playing, like Jazzy Jeff, for example. Shout out to Jazzy Jeff, plays it all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of DJs who are hip hop DJs still play that in their set. So, I'm happy for that.
So when you did Game Records, it was like one-offs kind of, right? With a bunch of like underground like rappers, up and coming rappers, and
Yeah, it was mostly it was we were part of that Raucous era, and Raucous, to be quite honest, was leading the way. They were the ones that were kind of carving out the space, and as a result, we had a nice run. We had some of those records sold 60, 70,000 pieces of vinyl.
It's crazy.
I mean, nowadays, Boom and Scary Movies.
Scary Movie is one of my favorite records, man.
Oh, thank you. But yeah,
I mean, I
just when Royce comes in the beginning,
Yeah.
I'm not one of the silly rappers. That's just crazy.
oh yeah.
So my theory is evolved on Game, because
ahead.
to me Game, and I was a big fan of Game and the covers. I love seeing like the Latin shorties and the black shorties and the Asian shorties come out. So then there was like a game, and I would say it was almost like the first Girls Gone Wild, but like a hip hop version of Girls Gone Wild DVD or VHS tape.
It's called Hip Hop Honeys.
Hip Hop Honeys that you started.
Yeah.
And that was Game too.
That was under Game as well. Yes, that's right.
And I remember I bought one, and there was a scene in Vegas.
Yeah.
And my theory was that you went to Vegas to shoot this, and you somehow fell in love with that city, or you made some connections there, and you're like, yo, like, I might have to make the move out here.
You know what? You're not far off. I mean, that's pretty accurate. I mean, it was, that was around the time when I realized that I could run the different businesses I was pursuing, which was basically records and DVDs from here, because I felt that there was a lot of opportunity here, and I also felt that the city was welcoming in the sense that if you had these kind of ideas and you had these connections, you could do things with it,
Yeah.
And that part of it is just running the businesses, setting up an office, having a staff, having a place. New York City, as we know, is a very expensive city, and running a business out here is a much better proposition. But also just being in the city and the energy, you're right. When we started filming things here, started hanging out here, that's when I started thinking, maybe I should just move up the whole operation here, and that's what ended up happening.
I feel I kind of felt, or I had this theory, because when I first came out here and I did my first like trial run at Light, from my residency from New York to before I moved out to Vegas, I came here and I was like, wow, like they haven't really seen our type of breed of hustle. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
the hustle that never brings, the hustle that I bring, the hustle that you bring, and our kind of like our perspective, our wide perspective on the music and business and everything. It's like they don't know about that yet.
No, I agree. I've always said that if you come to Vegas, now it's changed now because it's many years later, but back then, if you had that New York mindset where you think outside the box, you're not just trapped in this, one role or anything like that. Like you understand all these other connections. You're right. That was an edge for a long time here. Knowing people, knowing things, understanding music, understanding markets, marketing, all that, that was an edge for a long time over what had existed previously with the club scene and the music scene here. That being said, the one thing that I learned was when I was doing Game Records and Hip Hop Honeys out here, I was selling to the whole country and the whole world, much like hiphopsite.com. War and Peace and Pizzo, who are good friends of mine, they were selling vinyl to the whole country.
Yeah.
So we ended up setting up our offices on Maryland Parkway across from UNLV.
I remember that. Yeah.
Wow. I used to go vinyl shopping there.
Yeah, right. That was sort of my connection here was Warren and Pizzo, and so both of us were sort of, oh man, look, we're selling stuff to the whole country and the whole world, and everyone in Vegas is only just focused on Vegas. So it gave us sort of this feeling like, oh, we're doing big things,
global shit from Vegas, yeah.
But that ended up kind of biting us in the ass, all of us, because the vinyl market kind of dried up,
right?
The DVD market kind of dried up,
right?
And what was popping? Clubs in Vegas. So the thing that we kind of looked down on ended up being a much longer lasting industry actually than what we were doing. So in other words, the club scene in Vegas, which at first when it was just those clubs we mentioned earlier,
right,
it was just like really small and it wasn't that fun and there weren't that many DJs and all that. But then this little niche ended up being like the biggest thing ever in like live music, like a huge industry with tons of money and tons of opportunity and tons of things going on and all these venues and all these DJs.
Right.
So I ended up, what started for me as almost like a side project, which with those DJs I mentioned, AM, Ronson, Stretch, and others, Premier, Tony Touch, people like that.
You were bringing all of these guys to Vegas.
I would be sometimes the first time they ever play Vegas and stuff like that. And then there was others, but yeah, that ended up, maybe it was like 10% of my work day. Then it became 20%, then it became 30%. And pretty soon I was like, once all the other stuff started sort of fading away, vinyl faded away, DVDs faded away, all because of technology, you know. And, that's when I started focusing more on live DJs and nightclubs.
So I want to paint this picture, and never. I mean, you know, you moved out here in 2003.
Yeah.
I moved out here in 2005, end of 2005, beginning of 2006. When I met Shecky, it was at this, I would say, legendary hip hop night, which was Bounce Thursdays at Light.
Yeah.
All right.
I remember that, actually. I remember that.
So I would go in to Bounce Thursdays at Light, and Never would always be spinning there, you know? So, like, Never was the known hip hop dude there.
Yep.
And I would walk in, and I don't know if I knew how you looked, but I saw you walk in, and Shecky walks in, and I was like, all right, who? And then he has, I'm not fucking with you, like 20 to 30, like, bad Asian Latin chicks following him.
All the hip hop honeys are.
Exactly. And he got his table, and it was set up, and then it was just like, I would look at it, and I would just be like, yo, who is that? And he's like, yo, that's Sheck. And I was like, and then I was like, okay, yo, that's Game. That's the hip hop honeys. I'm like, yo, that shit is real. I'm like, yo, that shit is real. I was looking at it, I was like, yo, that's crazy. And then I remember Francine D was like big, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
She was like this big
part of it. Yeah, big part.
She was like the star, like the big titty Asian chick, import model, right? Who's killing the scene.
Import.
And then the fact that she was like hanging out and chilling, and then she was also, you know, dancing on the side a little bit. But like, yo, the fact that you saw these people like in person, it was like, yo, this is real. I was like, yo, this shit is crazy.
We you know, those are the glory days.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I would go up to Sheck. I'd be like, yo, what up, man? You know, and then he's always humble, always cool, and I would always like, he was probably annoyed at that time. You know, he's trying to like talk to shorties and talk business. I'm like, yo, tell me about some source shit. Like, tell me some shit from back in the day. I'm like, yo, let me hear some real shit. Let me hear some real stories and shit like that. And
I do have a vague recollection of those days, and also of Neva always being super cool during that time, because a lot of times we'd have other DJs coming in and out, and Neva was always so easy to deal with, and when it came to all that. And that was a great era. I mean, that was part of that whole time. We were booking DJs, but they also had to do events. They had to do things that we could do that were local. You didn't have to bring a lot of DJs, so there was doing the Game Girls.
But you were instrumental. You're the dudes that was bringing these DJs here first, because these nightclubs and marketing people in Las Vegas, they don't know these DJs. They don't know AM. They don't know Mark Ronson. So you're kind of, I mean, at the time, remember it evolved to them calling us mashup DJs?
Yeah.
When we were just club DJs.
Yeah. Well, mashup is a kind of amorphous word that means a lot of different things.
Right.
But, like, you know, yeah, that was the era of, well, AM, of course, pushed the agenda in terms of bringing every genre together, and that became the standard. You know, like, he set the standard very high, and then everyone followed. But yeah, hip-hop DJs, mashup DJs, as opposed to house DJs. Because back then, the house was in the small room, and hip-hop was in the big room. Now it's back to that. I don't know where we're at in that cycle now. The cycle is
kind of confusing right now, right?
Yeah, it's like the cycle goes. But in the beginning, in the early 03 days, house with Dead Mouse was in the back room and with 100 people, and Eddie McDonald was in the main room, or whoever, or Neva, or you, or whoever it was, playing to the main crowd, and the house was a small thing. And then somewhere, you know, and I always feel like it somehow coincided with the passing away of DJ AM, because when he passed away is exactly when EDM took off. Yeah. And without AM to kind of lead the way for the other side, there was no one stopping these European guys from claiming to be the big. Well, they were big. I mean, they were, because they're producers, are not just DJs, you know, the people that make records that everyone knows. And so it's like, that's the reason that they got so big and so forth. But
I would say we would all agree with that theory. Like everybody in this room. Yeah. When AM passed, and he was really the guy who was pushing the craft of DJing. Yeah. And I wouldn't even say he was pushing EDM music or anything, because at a certain point he was playing Daft Punk.
I mean, he played all that.
He played all of that shit.
Yeah. But he did it with some hip hop sense to it.
He did it with the old, not the old school, but he did it with the traditional hip hop craft of DJing. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And not what we see EDM DJs, not all EDM DJs, but most EDM DJs
Don't DJ.
they don't DJ.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's crazy? Like that year he passed, he did EDC. He was at EDC. He performed at EDC, and it was like mad hip hop ish, and it's not even like it was not EDM.
Yep, you're right.
I mean, he was still dropping. What do you call it?
He was playing Metallica
Around the world and stuff.
Yeah. He was playing a bunch of crazy shit.
But he was playing. What do you call it? Today is gonna be the day. He was
Oasis.
still playing Oasis.
Yeah.
For them, he was doing that legendary set that he does. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, and so you know, I mean, what I like to say when I reflect on all those years is I was lucky that I lived through two golden eras: the golden era of hip hop, which is close to my heart, and the golden era of EDM, which is not necessarily close to my heart, but I did see a lot of shit, and I did get to see, you know, at that point I ended up working with the Win pretty much. After I did the booking DJs for a while, I ended up basically becoming that role at the Win. So I was working with the Win Nightlife from about 2009 to 2014 or so, and 14, 15. And
crazy.
That was during the EDM explosion.
But we got to go back a little bit to AM and Mark Ronson.
Okay.
Now, when we were DJing, DJs were getting a certain amount of money. And I don't know if it attributes to you and what you were doing to negotiate the deals, but Shecky was negotiating and somehow making these $1 million motherfucking deals for DJs that no one ever fucking heard of. I remember when AM signed the first $1 million contract or multi-million dollar contract with Pure.
Yeah.
And he would be off to the side saying like, yeah, we got some cooking.
What was that?
We got some
2006? Was that 2006? When AM's first?
7 maybe?
No,
6 or 7?
No. It was earlier. It was like 5 or 6. Yeah,
5 or 6.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest AM was leading the way creatively. He was also leading the way in the terms of business because he was very good at recognizing his own self-worth. That was the lesson of many lessons I learned from him. It was know what you are worth and stand up for it. Like he was like starting to get more and more popular. And first he was getting 1,500 out here, then he was getting 2,500 out here, then he was getting 5,000 out here, and it kept going up and up. And then he made that big move to Pure, and there was a story which I've told before, which involves basically me sitting down with Stevie D, who was the head of Pure at that time, and we had discussed, I was AM's Vegas friend and like Vegas agent, you could say. I wasn't really his manager, but I sometimes played that role a little bit. And I had discussed with the other people like what we wanted, and basically I walked in and I said he was already the biggest DJ in Vegas at that point. He had been doing hard rock prior to that, right? Mm-hmm. So he was by far, and he was also dating Nicole Richie. Mm-hmm. So he was in the People magazine every week. I mean, he was like on the news every night, on like Entertainment Tonight and stuff like that. Yeah. He was a very big star at that moment. And so we walked into the room, and I said to Stevie D, hey, look, man, like who would be the biggest possible DJ I could help get for you right now? And he's like, AM? And I was like, yes. There is an opportunity at the right price that he will jump ship. And he's like, what's that price? And I told you I play poker, so I put my poker face on. And I wrote, it's like one of those old school movies. I wrote it on a piece of paper.
You slid it to him.
I slid it to him. I didn't even want to utter the words because I knew if I said it, like my voice would crack or something. I didn't want to like say the word. Mm-hmm. And I can be honest, a piece of paper said $20,000 for a night, per night. It's a 20K or something, right? Uh-huh. And he goes, and he looks at it and he goes, I can do this. And he wrote back and it said like 18,500. And I was like, this is it. I remember all the books I've read about negotiation. If you don't do it now, you're never going to like claw it back. So I wrote back 19,500. And he said, okay. So basically, after that happened, the news got out. Yeah. And not by me, but, AM and his people, somebody in his camp started blabbing about it. And
we all heard about it.
Everybody
knew about that shit.
Yeah. Everyone found out, and like it raised the bar up here.
Exactly.
So now it's like, okay, 50 nights, every weekend, once a week, 50 times a year, 20K a night. That's $1 million. So that's why that whole thing started. Of the $1 million was from that moment. Basically.
And
So you're the reason why we get cheese now. I appreciate it, Shay.
He's the reason why we got cheese, and then when AM passed, it kind of fell through a little bit. But yeah, so when that happened, it gave every DJ the opportunity to renegotiate and raise their prices up, which was a good thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
the ceiling got a lot higher.
It
The
did.
ceiling got way high.
Yeah.
He
Like,
broke it.
Yeah.
and then you raised the ceiling even higher when he moved to the Palms, right?
Yeah. That was, and also don't forget, he also did LAX.
LAX is
Oh,
right.
Yeah. There was another stop in between, because that was another Stevie D club, was LAX.
But he was bouncing from like Pure and LAX, or no?
I think he was doing both of those at the same time. I think so.
Wait, they were
I
doing
think so also.
Tangerine, right?
I don't think AM did Tangerine.
No.
No, but that was Stevie D, right?
That was Stevie
That
D.
was Stevie D, yeah.
But AM was doing Pure and LAX.
Okay.
Wait,
Yeah.
Back and forth.
This is
Yep.
after Body English?
After Body
After Body
English,
English,
yes. And that was his set. And then the first gig ever was at this one at Light, this DJ series I mentioned. That was his first Vegas gig.
How was that?
That was awesome. He killed it. He destroyed that. That was
I have a story. Was you there the first time AM ever did Light back in 02?
so not this big city DJ series.
No, before this.
Oh, I didn't know there was an earlier one.
Well,
Are you
this
sure
I
you're
was.
not the same one? You might be talking about the same
I
one
don't
or
think
not.
so. I was in New York. I was flying from New York to Vegas to DJ, and they had double booked us, me and AM. And this is back in the days when Light, they had the rotary mixer.
Okay, like a
They didn't have
Yuri?
the crossfader.
Yuri?
Exactly, yeah. They didn't have a crossfader.
Uh-huh.
And they booked AM to DJ. And he couldn't DJ. He didn't want to do it.
So he didn't get on, or he did get on?
He tried to get on, but he couldn't. He didn't want to fuck with the rotary.
There was no
just
fader.
There was
Was
no
it-
fader. And he was just like, I don't.
Was this like a corporate event or like a regular club?
Regular club night.
I didn't know about. I honestly never heard
Nah.
about that. I never heard that story.
But he's not the only DJ that said they couldn't do it and walked off the not
Light,
not
at
walked
the
off
original-
the
He
gig.
was the biggest though.
at Light
Yeah, Light, yeah.
when you went up the escalators, the old school.
Yeah,
Light.
the old school Light.
Yeah.
And he was like, I had opened up for him. He came in, he was DJing, and then he was just like, 15 minutes in, he was like, nah, I'm gonna chill, man. I can't do this.
Man,
I
I didn't
need
know
a
that.
crossfader.
I did not know that. That reminds me, though, of another Light story. This is kind of similar. Pete Rock came, and I didn't book him. I got involved late for some reason. I got a call from Sean. He's like, hey, man, like, I need your help. Pete Rock is showing up. Can you please go pick him up at the airport? He has to get on. He's going on at midnight or whatever, 1 a.m., whatever it was. It was like midnight. And so I go to pick up Pete Rock. I knew him just a little bit. We reconnected. He was late. He missed his original flight. He didn't show up. Let's just say he has to go on at midnight. He landed at like 11:15 or something, okay? So it was like time crunch. I pick him up. He starts saying, I don't want to DJ. I want to eat. I need to eat, man. I need to eat. And so he he wants to go to In-N-Out. And I was like, no. And I said, no. I said, man, no. We can't. We have to go to the club because like you're late and we have to get there. So we get there. And of course, back then it was the record, so we had to. That was the thing. Whenever we booked a DJ back then, you had to account for the time of carrying all the records because they would travel, especially Riz and people like that, with like 6 crates of records. I mean, it was like a lot of shit.
You had to go to Baggage Claim, wait for that shit.
Wait
to
for
come
that
out.
shit, then you had to load it up, and you had to wheel it out in the car, and then when you got to Bellagio, you had to unload it, immediately take it to the club.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the club was already open, so that was a clusterfuck.
And that DJ booth at Light was about
Tiny.
as,
The worst,
as
man.
big as like a small closet in like a studio apartment in New York.
Tiny. So he shows up with his crates. So we get there. Eddie is DJing, and it's a regular. I think it was a Sunday night.
It was
like
a Sunday. I
their
remember
big
that night,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was their big night. So it was a Sunday night. So that's their big. Everyone in Vegas.
It was the big
trendy
industry night at the
Industry
time.
night, yeah, at
Yeah.
the time. The biggest industry night at the time. So I see Pete, and I look down, and he starts to sort through his records. And what do I see? EPMD, Jungle Brothers, and Tribe Called Quest. And I see all these like classic hip hop, and I'm like, uh-oh, this is not going to go well. I already know. This is not going to go well because that was not what they were expecting. That's what Pete was expecting to play, but that's not what the club was expecting to hear. So, but no one, again, I said, I didn't book this one, so whoever I booked it did not properly explain.
It was probably Sean Christie.
It probably was someone else. I don't want to throw someone under the bus, but I know who it was.
Okay, all right.
I actually know who it was.
Oh,
But anyway, he did. That person did not properly explain. So anyway, he gets on, and the first song is "Raw" by Big Daddy Kane. and the sound, the audio quality goes way down because that song is like very thin. It doesn't really have like highs and lows. It's like, it's like very kind of like trebly. It's like really thin, and it's like, so suddenly like the whole club feels different, and then he lets it play all the way through the third verse, through the fucking chorus, the third chorus. The next one comes on. It was. I can't remember. It was another similar like golden era song, which was great for me. But at that point, people start leaving, and Sean starts flipping out. All the staff, Andrew Sasson, like, "What is this? What is this? Get him off! Get him off! Get him off! Get him off!" So I go and I'm like, "Hey man, like, and he's DJing, so it's the worst fucking feeling in the world,
right?
When someone sends, and these crazy club owners of Vegas, I know you guys have experienced this many times,
yes,
especially in your early days,
definitely.
Somebody showing up at Light in particular, someone trying to tell you what to play while you're DJing, okay? So, which is a very uncool thing to do, okay? In any time, all right, for any DJ. So I go up and I like tap him on the shoulder and say, "Hey man, like, and like, can you listen, they're not really feeling the golden era stuff. Can you play?" And he was like, "Yo, that's all I brought. That's all I brought." And Eddie, thank God, was there with his records. So Eddie saw what was going on and he's like, I got you. And he starts showing him his records. And then Pete reaches down. I remember he throws on Headsprung, LL Cool J, which was a more mainstream song at that time. It was a big hit. And that point, everything goes fine. He starts playing Eddie's records, so the night went well. That was, of course, also pre-Serato. So it wasn't like in these days when you want to play house? Okay, boom. You want to play this? Boom. It was like, if you didn't have those records, you were fucked. You know? So anyway.
That's crazy. I remember Eddie telling me that, and then Eddie felt bad too. That I mean, both.
Eddie's
of you guys,
like, this guy's a legend. I don't want to tell him what to play. Like, and by the way, that same scenario repeated itself many times over the years with Steve Aoki, with not just hip hop DJs, where the owner of a club doesn't like what he's hearing, and me or someone like me has to go and tell this guy who we're paying like tens of thousands of dollars to not to play something, to play more like this or more like that.
That happened a lot at Light, though. I remember.
I used to like run away from the DJ booth.
Yeah.
If there was a guest DJ and the owners didn't like him, they'd be like, "Oh, never. You got to go to the DJ and tell him that you got to kick him off." And I'm like, this dude's a legend. I'm not going to kick him off. So I used to like hide this shit by the bar.
I used to do the
So
same
they'd be
thing.
like, never could kick him off and get back on.